Sure. Jujaksuba, Chansu Juguruba. Tamje Kamala Chazalo, Digeta,
This is the sutra recalling the three jewels. Sutra of recalling the three jewels. Homage to the omniscient one, purified and consummated, victorious, virtuous and transcendent, thus gone for destroying. Entirely perfect Buddha, full of wisdom, the blissfully proceeding, the knower of the world, charioteer and subduer of beings, the unsurpassable, the teacher of gods and men and humans. Such is Buddha, victorious, virtuous and transcendent. He who is thus gone exemplifies the merit which is his cause. In him no root of virtue is ever worn away. Through his manifold patience, he is excellently beautiful. He is the treasure ground of merit, adorned with the tokens of enlightenment. He is the tokens of enlightenment. He is graced with the flowers of marks of the marks of Buddhahood. All he does is timely and opportune, and nothing harmonious mars the sight of him. True joy indeed he gives to those who open up their hearts to him in faith. Through the brilliance of his wisdom, he is the unconfounded, and against his power there is no victory. He is the teacher of all living beings, the father of Bodhisattvas, the king of all supreme ones. He is the guide of those who journey to the city beyond affliction. His wisdom is unbounded, his assurance is beyond imagining, his speech is altogether pure, well-tuned and sweet to hear. Gazing on him, one is never sated. His body is beyond compare by the realms of desire. He is unstained by the realm of form. He is wholly uncontaminated. He is not mingled with the formless. He is altogether free from misery, and from the aggregates he is utterly and altogether liberated. The elements have no hold on him. He has mastery of the sense powers. All bonds He has completely severed him from all pain. He is perfectly and totally released. No craving does he have. He has passed beyond the stream. Perfect is his wisdom, and in the wisdom of the Buddha, past, present, future. Buddha's past, present, and to come. He has made his dwelling in Nirvana, where all suffering stands in death. He does not abide his abode in the summit of perfection, whence he perceives all living beings, achieves the sublime qualities, which are the greatness of the Buddha, victorious, virtuous, and transcendent. Do you get me? 1, 2, 3, check for English translation. Okay, thank you. Well spoken is the Dharma by the victorious, virtuous, and transcendent. It is perfect way. It is the perfect way of seeing and is devoid of flaws. It is perennial and leads us to onward. To see this Dharma is to fulfill one's purpose. It produces them in the wise, the wisdom of the all distinguishing. Wisdom all distinguished, the Dharma spoken by the victorious, virtuous, transcendent is shown to be well tempered to the instruction and the need of all. It drives one from samsara and causes one to go to perfect Buddhahood. It is free from contradiction, and in it all is summarized. It is totally to be relied upon. It is cutting the root. The Sangha of the Mahayana comprises those who have well entered, wisely entered with the straightforwardness and aptitude. Right it is to join one's hands before them, the right to make prostrations. They are the glorious fields of merit. They are the perfect recipients of gifts. Gifts, they are the object of offering everywhere and always they are the worthy objects of offerings. Next is the Heart Sutra. Thus did I hear at one time that Bhagwan was dwelling a mass of Valchap mountain in Rajagriha together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagwan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the bodhisattva... No. Radio's there. Behind you. Also, at the number of this Mahasattvarya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, the great being, noble Avalokiteshvara, how should any son of the lineage who wishes to train in the practice of the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom. He said that, and the Bodhisattva, great being, noble Avalokiteshvara, said this to the Venerable Sharadodiputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form, and form too is not other than emptiness. In this way, feelings, discrimination, composition factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, and not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on up to including no mind element and mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on up to. And including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, that origination, cessation, true path, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, but the bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear, having completely gone past beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the 3 times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. that Yatha Gate Gate Parasangate Bodhi Swaha Shariputra Bodhisattva Mahasattva, the great being, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagwan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva, the great being, Navalabalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice, the Bhagwan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva, the great being, are Navalabalokiteshvara. Those surrounding India entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, Asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. Holiness wants the chant master to come forward. So that there would be more space for people to move up. Yes. Let's recite the praise of the 17 Nalanda masters. The prayer to kindle the threefold faith, addressed to the 17 great Panditas of glorious Nalanda institution by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Perfectly arisen through the compassionate wish to benefit beings, and more exalted even than gods, you have reached the supreme level of protection and abandonment and realization, and guide beings to liberation through teaching us on dependent origination. Mighty Shakyamuni, son among teachers in devotion, I pay homage to you. You brilliantly clarify the meaning of reality, except the ultimate intent of the Mother Panchaparamitas, with profound modes of logical reasoning based on dependent reasoning. Founder of the middle way tradition of the supreme vehicles, prophesied by the Buddha himself, noble Master Nagarjuna, to you I pray. You were the foremost of his spiritual heirs, supremely learned and accomplished, a master of all the infinite schools of philosophy inside and outside of your own tradition, and the glorious crowning jewel of all who follow Nagarjuna's approach, Bodhisattva Arya Deva, to you I pray. I pray you clarify the wisdom and intent of the Arya, the ultimate meaning of dependent origination, as well as the profound and crucial meaning concerning merely nominal and imputed existence, and reach the level of supreme accomplishment. Noble Buddha Palita, at your feet I pray. Great Pandita, who founded the comprehensive system in which the extremes, such as the arising of true entities, are refuted, and valid logic and commonly perceived outer objects are accepted. Acharya Bhav Viveka, to you I pray. You developed and elaborated upon the complete path of Sutra and Tantra, skillfully teaching the profound and vast, the middle way tradition of appearance and emptiness, in which the two extremes are dispelled through dependent origination and the mere fact of conditionality. Glorious Chandrakirti, to you I pray. You skillfully revealed to the assembly of fortunate disciples the most wondrous and amazing path of the great compassion in so many ways and with reasoning both profound and vast. Bodhisattva Shantideva, to you I pray. Founder of the tradition which skillfully combines Madhyamaka and Brahman, teaching the middle way path of twofold the non-dual emptiness according to the capacity of disciples. and introducing the Buddha's teaching to the land of snows. Great Abhachandarakshita, to you I pray. You brilliantly set out the stages of meditation according to both Sutra and Tantra, combining the views of the middle way beyond extremes with the unity of Samatha and Vipassana, and clearly revealed the unmistaken teaching of the Buddha in the land of snows. Noble Kamalashilas, to you I pray. Guided and cared for by Maitreya, you worked brilliantly to further all the Mahayana teachings and skillfully set out the approach of vast conduct. Founder of the tradition of mind only prophesied by the Buddha, noble master Sangha, to you I pray. You have held the tradition of the 7 treatises of the Abhidhamma in twofold and the non-dual and non-duality, and clarify the philosophies of Vaibhashika, Sautrantika and Vijnanavada, most excellent of scholars, renowned as a second all-knowing Buddha, Acharya Vasubandhu, to you I pray. Master logician who granted the eyes of wisdom, you set and line the lamp which illuminates the text of ornament for realization and the meaning of transcendent wisdom passed down by the Sangha and his brother in accordance with the Madhyamaka tradition beyond all extremes of existence and non-existence. Arya Vimukti Sena, at your feet I pray. As prophesied by the Buddha, you explained the Mata Panchaparamita, and according to the instruction received from the protector Maitreya, clarified the 3 mothers, the supreme scriptures of transcendent wisdom. Acharya Haribhadra, to you I pray. You brilliantly summarize the meaning of the vast Vinaya collection according to the tradition of Sarvasthi Vadans and explained the Patimoksha superbly and without mistake. Supremely disciplined and learned Gunaprabha, at your feet I pray. You gained the precious treasure-like qualities of threefold training and brilliantly explained the meaning of extensive scriptures in order to preserve the flawless teaching of monastic discipline. Supreme holder of Vinaya, Shaktaprabha, at your feet I pray. You imparted all the profound and vast teachings given by the Buddha by explaining the paths for beings of the 3 levels of spiritual capacity and caused the Buddha's teaching to flourish within the land of snows. Kind and precious Lord Atisha, to you I pray. Through these prayers of mine made with a mind of vivid and unshakable faith to these most brilliant of scholars who, like ornaments, enhanced and beautified the world and were the supreme sources for many wondrous and excellent teachings, may my mind be blessed so that it is matured and brought to liberation. May I be blessed. So today we are going to have a Dharma discourse. So this, which means whether in Tibet or in the Himalayan regions, the practitioners, when they come across the teachings like this, they usually think about reciting mantras and doing some rituals. In Tibet, when extensive teachings were given for the Gyalwang, they usually have the teachings on the graduated path to enlightenment, and then other traditions relate what are known as the 4 ways of turning the mind away from attachment to samsara. And so, of course, these are very good, which has helped and benefited many hundreds of people. As for me, I'm an 82-year-old person who has seen many things around the world. And therefore, the tradition that we have been used to in Tibet seems to be according to the system called the specifically tailored teaching for individuals, but not the system of introducing the general structure of the teaching of the Buddha. So teaching the two truths, which relates to the how things are, and then leading on to the Four Noble Truths and so forth, is not done so much. Of course, in the Lamrim by Tsongkhapas, there's the brief teaching on the Four Noble Truths, but mainly the teachers and masters have focused on giving some initiations of deities, tantric yoga, the deity yoga practices, and then the students also more or less focused on the deity yoga practice of tantra and reciting mantras. But today we are in the 21st century, in this world, which is lots of filled with hustle and puzzles. If we leave aside the general structure of the teaching of the Buddha and only focus on the specifically tailored teaching of Tantra, I think that this is not sufficient. Therefore, when I give teachings, first I give an introduction to the teaching of the Buddha, the Buddhism, and then having done that, when you are able to actually relate to how to do the practices in one sitting, that would be more relevant. So in other words, what I'm saying is the introducing Buddhism on the basis of the like summarizing the content of the over 300 volumes of Buddhist literature. So although I'm not able to do much, but I do my best to give an introduction to Buddhism first, and then for, of course, some individuals, if we can lead them onto the path specifically tailored for individuals. And so if you look at the Gangyur and the Tengyur literature, most of them teach according to the structure, general structure of the teaching of the Buddha, the general approach to the teaching. Whereas in Tantra, then you find the Buddha appearing in the form of a deity, the principal deity of the mandala, and giving teachings, tantric initiations, tantric teachings to very specific disciples. So in the case of, for example, the Heart Sutra, at the end we find mentioned that in the assembly, in the audience of the teaching of this perfect wisdom, there were the humans, gods, humans, Asuras, Gandharvas, and so forth, which shows that there is a huge number of different types of beings listening to the teaching. So the first teaching of the Buddha, teaching on the Four Noble Truths, is something which is given publicly, in public, whereas the Paramita teachings were not given publicly like that. Although it mentions in the assembly of there were the Asuras, Gandharvas, and so forth, and therefore there was this argument that the Mahayana was not taught by the Buddha himself. Mahayana was not the words of the Buddha, because these teachings, like the Panchaparamita teachings, were not given in public, in big assemblies of disciples. And particularly there were people who said, even in the past, that Tantra also is not the teaching of the Buddha. It is actually taken from the Hindu tradition. But in Tibet, Tantra became very prevalent. In Tantra, of course, Vajramaster is very important, therefore Guru is said to be very important. So, but just following the tradition, without the teacher being able to give much introductory teaching of the of Buddhism, but following some rituals. Therefore, some Westerners who have visited Tibet in the past have termed Buddhism in Tibet as Lamaism. It's the teachings of the Lamas, as if. So, of course, in the great monastic learning institutions, and of all the different traditions of Buddhism in Tibet, the general approach to the teaching of the Buddha was actually studied and practiced, whereas, generally speaking, in other parts of Tibet, in other monastic institutions, people followed more or less the tantric system, considering the Lama as the most important, and therefore, even there is a proverb which says, in each land there is they have a Lama, and each Lama has his own tradition, religious tradition. So my friend, so I usually call him a lame friend, and since a long time I've been calling him by that, and therefore today, as a consequence of, as comic consequence, I'm becoming lame. So within the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, we have the Nyingma, the old translation tradition, and then the Sarma tradition, which includes the Kagyu and then Sakya. And within the Sakya, of course, there are those of the Sakya, Ngorpa, and Sarpa. And within the Kagyu tradition, there are the 4 major and 8 minor or subdivisions, minor traditions. And we more or less in the past focused on the specifically tailored teachings and caused a lot of drawbacks in our tradition. And this is, I find this to be wrong. And therefore, we need to mend this by seeing the drawbacks of following such a tradition, and therefore, His Holiness says it's too long for. This is a blessing for the tea. The prayer to Shakyamuni Buddha.
Lodok nam deep the pane, can it is okay talk now, can it should it that it jar so they should it that so look at the now, can it comes up Boston the candle, not some of you to jar and me union. Can it come to the Golo get to Kabila Peste, can it jicane, can it not some of those exist, can it comes up Boston the candle, can it new cafe, they Milan Sanjik, can it Sandra Chitane, can it
About 100 years ago, there was a very great Lama of Kham, who was a great learned and experienced Lama, and so he uses these terms called the general approach to the teaching of the Buddha and the specifically tailored teaching for individuals.
tene porla sungen Himalaya jurel sungen jo kandijate ma hantok chemo yo kya so ha ta teo nangzilla tene standard chisan tene Skonto ne sungtu do ketena standard chisan e tokna kabo ketena nalande khase tene soju nin kan do te tokna tene kabo go sa to ma khasen jo do so ha tene tene te do so ma pena Digi Tsongkhapas Ketana, Tene Mimangla, Tene Songkanje, Kaba Ketana, Lojusam, Dankani, Lojusina, Yokanji, and also. Tene Sherat Ninko Ketana, Tene Chagotumpe, Gia, Soma Zachapa, Hadam Lina, Hama in Dankezu Mampuji, Tene Soma Zachap, Ina, Keba Ketana, Lojusina, Netan Constitution, and also. Tena Tola Snack Ketana, Tene Sangi Sondanda, Tene Hajigi tene nampa tene zuwa tula date tene khako tena laspaktan tene ni mana la tene zampo sakan kala tene kan tezu khachi so kyamene nimam tene deji so so maga cha so te o so basan te singata kolla sulban te o namti je tezu cha so te bija tene fogla tene lama one konga tene tene tuga bakane tene tsumlik che samate kanza bosan date sumata chaso tene bi jaste tene smako ketena lama sto sike di jaste tene lama bete sumkano tene mibule tene tola bosa tsetio tene yane dakan di jaste tene porla dasinga tane tene sa kula de kana sa kya de kana karju de kana te tanko tene sodu tene tezu atem kya tene lama kone tene uja gana sui sato sui marco tezu wana tanziga tene te junkya sa kyo nye sona tene marika sa si fondu tego tene ketena siga suga tena yucho chongo chas tene kachan tu kyo kya sa ta tena na bete so tene sacha soksia sango tama sa no tsatsum zete tezu tene prana tene rig mida da mida sumdu kya tena nanjin ka tene karju dina chetena karju cheji chungya zete tezu mapo tene yongsha somara sombasam tibu chetena natan chetena patokta junkyapa ina tena yusho chegusa kakten jute chas manata dita daksa tene turam nishu saksikpe chigabu inkan bijaste tene natan chetena sanga chitan tene sangya se tene
ngaju ningol chashana ningo kama.
So with regard to the Nyingma, there are the teachings of the Karma, and then the revealed treasure, hidden teachings, and then there are so many of these hidden treasures which were revealed, and accordingly people follow the different strands of these revealed treasure teachings. And then the Kadam, the Gyalwang tradition, there is the Se-Gyu, Se lineage, and then Ansa lineage. So there are also arguments from the Ansa tradition to the Se lineage. And then accordingly, because of focusing on very specifically tailored teachings for individuals, because of that, people started also arguing against each other, and therefore discriminations based on the teachings have happened. Whereas if we focus on the general approach of the teaching, there won't be such disagreements and discriminations.
Table Songbasam, understand that in the Kola Sonte, Kola Tatani Chosuke, and Sunday is so none the Lami is on it, and the Hindu and Desmond, or the Lamas with any Yaman Chosanga, that sometimes the two chicks of that the Lugu Tower from Songbasama, and the Lugukina, Nedna, and the Sunday is Katami and so on the time, and the Sharon is the Lugu. Songbasam could be Nandu. Standard system do tene G tate tene kandu bina chi sunga jatano tewo jacha jamata tewo mino na go to tene tezu na samdi bona tene kuda misu sapte na tezu sungo chara tapandi to tene tezu tene katana tene mo ota divi indusane
Therefore, the over 300 volumes comprising the Kanjur and Tenjur, the words of the Buddha and its exegetical treatises, are the source of our knowledge. And therefore, it's very important for us to use these for our study. And in the 17th Nalanda Master praise that we just recited, according to the Pali tradition, the Buddha turned only one wheel of Dharma, whereas according to the Sanskrit tradition, there are 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma. So on the basis of the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, there are the Vaibhashikas, philosophical school, and also the practice of Vinaya, the monastic discipline. And then in the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, which consists of the perfection of wisdom teachings, and which is according to Sanskrit tradition, we have the philosophical view and the philosophical traditions of the Madhyamaka, the middle way school. And then in the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, on the basis of that, we have the Chittamatra, the mind-only school of philosophy. So in other words, the 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma, the 3 sermons of the Buddha, gave rise to, according to the 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma, then there came the 17 Nalanda masters who actually commented on, explained these teachings, who used logical reasoning to come to the point of establishing the truth, the ground truth, and then the proceeding along the path, and then the resultant stage. So the Buddha himself has said, during the teaching on the 4 Noble Truths, the Buddha also touched on the basic, the nature of how things are in his first turning of the wheel of Dharma, where he said, this is the suffering, this is true suffering, this is true origin, and so forth. And then, after having established the grounds, the basis, then the Buddha said, taught about the proceeding along the path. And then at the end, the Buddha said, during the second phase, he said that the suffering must be known, the origin must be overcome, that cessation must be actualized, and then the path cultivated. And then at the third phase of this 4th Noble Truth teaching, he said, the suffering must be known, but there's nothing to be known, and so forth, which teaches the resultant stage. And then this is elaborated further into the basis being the two truths, and then the path and comprising method and wisdom, and then the results comprising the two true Buddha bodies. So these are explained on the basis of logical reasoning, following the Madhyamaka tradition, philosophical approach, and using logic and reasoning. And therefore, when you are able to understand these, then you can actually face challenges against the teaching of the Buddha. So once there is a story that some Lama was giving a teaching, and one person from the audience asked, "Where is the Buddha that you said to be a very holy or sacred?" And then the Lama said, for some time kept quiet, and then he responded by saying, "Oh, the Buddha is somewhere up there in this heaven, in the blue heavens, in the crystal palace, radiant." So instead of saying such things, if the Lama were knowledgeable, then he would have touched on the teaching of the two truths, which shows that things are dependently originated, dependently arisen, and on the basis of this causality, where you understand that causes and conditions bring about their results. And therefore, we touch on the nature of the two truths, the nature of the path or the practice, which is referred in Abhisamaya Alamkara, the clear ornament for clear realization by Maitreya. So having introduced the disciples to two truths, and then the Four Noble Truths could be introduced. And having done that, then the disciples could be made to understand within that teaching of the Four Noble Truths, then the disciples could be made to understand that of the true cessation, which is brought about with the true path, and the true cessation of suffering and its origin must be brought about the true path. And then we can talk about these two, the path and the cessation, comprising the true Dharma, and the person who actually embodies this Dharma, the true Dharma, is a Sangha. And then, as a result of further practice, then one becomes Buddha. And so in this way, one could lead people or their disciples to understand the resultant state of Buddhahood. And therefore, we can actually prove that Buddhahood is possible because of Buddha nature. That is to say that the mind that we have, which is tainted now, can be purified. And so in this way, we could actually lead disciples to understand the two truths, the Four Noble Truths, and then the three jewels, and so forth. So in this way, by following reason and logic, we can actually face challenges from other people who may criticize the teaching of the Buddha, and we can also explain the teaching of the Buddha logically to scientists. So in the past, of course, Tibet remained isolated without having any contact with outside world, and we were more or less satisfied with what we were doing. But today, we are in we have access to the wider world. So in such a situation, if you have to say that I really don't know much about Buddhism when you are asked about what the teaching of Buddha is about, then that's a shame. It's a shame. So the way we were following the teaching traditionally was quite a drawback. There's a shortcoming in it, which means that we were following the teaching blindly and on the basis of blind faith. So the teaching of the Buddha is not something which should be followed blindly with blind faith. But the Buddha himself has said, "O monks and scholars, just as a gold is tested by burning, rubbing, and cutting, likewise you should examine my teaching thoroughly and then follow it, not because you have devotion to me." So what he's saying is that those who follow him must not follow him out of blind faith, just taking his words without doing any kind of analysis, but they must do analysis and experiment the teaching. And therefore, we can see that we can see the Buddha being so confidently telling us that his teaching must be put to the test of reasoning and experiment. So, of course, amongst all the teachers, the founding teachers of the different religious traditions, it is only the Buddha. Nobody else has said that his teaching should be analyzed and experimented. And therefore, accordingly, we should use our intelligence and gain the understanding of the teaching based on reason and be a 21st century Buddhist.
tene tevula tene dazu tene sangye pundu tene tene tutam tene tene ji tene ni sta manta tene dazu skuni tene nanda pote zuwa yo kya so ta tevu men ba tene tene nana tene logi chi kya so tene nana ko la lama ji tene so so wan ya do sangye ta ko tene ma so tene tene mi ji tiwa te kya so tene sangye tene chi na kana ji te kya so tiwa tene sangye tene ma ta ko ma ni na ke tene shele kanpe na tene thamba me ju ke ta so tene ke ju ba cha cha kya so ba somba samara dasi tene 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 sandu kyudu ni tene ka tene ni ja tene ma ta tevi nanda ko chana ji denga ni la ta tene da lu ko ni tene na gare se te ji denga ni san la ta tene ko ba no te da du sangye se go ko te se to ta ko te mu ge te mo na te yu tu cha ko tene sangye de ta ni yu cha te ju te tene ma ta na ko na tene se tene de se ko yu ta ni ja te te wo na tene yu ra ta te tene sangye de ni te ke pa ta ne jiga bu te tene te yu ta na yo mo ta so somba samara da si pandu ju du ni tene ma ta tene sangye chi su mo te tene ke du structure za te ke du na ta de mo ji ta na tene ji den ba ni lam ta che ni da du ku ni se tene ke du na ta me wo na de mo to se sta na za te yo kya so somba sa pandu ju du tene ma kha te yo te du ta pa kya so na so ni te se mo te so na tene te wo de za cha so che tene sangye koran tene tene mi su kan no structure so se cha da me se de pa ta la mai ka Lama te kushi min mo te successful mo te kya. Sitene na chulu manko e kya te na kati te na te na mi mo pa tanto te te ro kompra mo na tanto te kya ma pa to no te mo le te na ma ta te ne ke wa to go te mo te ma kha te mo so ma ta te o min ba te o le te na te ne Disket ko pa ko mo de kan de ke na na ko te ne Disket ko pa do su sha na dare se so ka na de ba God je kan do ke na na te na tene shedi kampaje ju ke utada ke du chi je sa somba sa da si ma ta kholo su bola tene ma ta starter to te la pozon chano nyam ko tene na pa sangye pe so la tene ka du chi tene kiwa chi len na te kiwa bola lan den ba ma gyala to te kap nyense te tene chu chi ko tene ma ta na te ju na yo te no so te o somba sa ma ta ku da ishu sa si pe tene ni mu ke tena Lama chen chakka zatan vete ka madhuwa tene yu chen no jambu se ko makha chen yu te tena tene jiwa jik yung na tene matan hana porda tuka namjin la tene lama jik to tene gom jik ya te go tu te chan son tene den me ta tuka na tene sambu yu te metya ta samatan tene kilo go yu la idu tene jik ten kupe na tene matan duste yu tena so samana tiwa na ko yu te kya Tibijate ibu jam te tena jam jam sa kapsan di te tena kami na kiwa kazu si yong na tewa la lan yap nyan jasi chuchi tena mata na piju na yo tena isu si san sangi to na koran so kya jama stonga spes na so kya ye defendo de koran ne startacho te chiwa cho na se to tibijate tena kasa tura misu sa se tena mata tewa jam e jam sa to tena kapsan di tena lama ken
Right.
So, regarding the teaching of the Buddha, it is something that can be explained logically and explained through reason. When you do that, when we talk about the objects of knowledge, which are the basis, there are the three types of objects of knowledge, which are called the manifest, the obvious objects, and then the slightly hidden and the very hidden phenomena. So with regard to the very hidden phenomena, it is said that we should resort to scriptural authority or from the experience of an experienced person, words of the experienced person. So in order to be able to do that, we need to actually find whether the person to whom we rely, whose words we rely on, is somebody reliable or not. And therefore, Pramana Vartika by Dharmakirti says that the teaching on liberation, when we actually analyze the teaching on the basis of understanding of emptiness, so understanding of emptiness leading to liberation and so forth, whether this kind of teaching is something which is infallible, which can stand the test of reasoning, is found to be, when we find that it can actually stand the test of reasoning, and then we can actually infer that the other teachings, which are very hidden, can be taken as reliable. So when we use this kind of logic to come to the conclusion and to actually prove the slightly hidden phenomena such as emptiness through reason, then this also must be corroborated by experience, direct experience as well. So within the logic, there are those logics where we see that if something is observable and if something exists, that it must be perceptible. And if it's not perceptible, then it cannot exist. This is one type of logic. And therefore, based on this kind of logic, I usually reject, of course with due respect to the former scholars, I reject the existence of Mount Meru as the center of the universe or cosmos. So according to the Abhidharmakosha by Vasubandhu, it is said, it mentions the Mount Meru in the center of the universe, and then surrounded by the 4 major continents, and and then the sun and moon going around the Mount Meru, rotating on Mount Meru almost at the same height and so forth. These cannot be taken literally. Of course, it's not only Abhidharmakosha by Vasubandhu which says it, but he was actually following what the tradition which was prevalent at that time. So if we have to accept Mount Meru, we should be able to see Mount Meru when we travel around the world, from India to Japan, Japan to America, and from America to Europe, Europe to India, and back from India to Europe, America, and so forth. Nobody has seen Mount Meru during these their flights. So Mount Meru is said to be 80,000 leagues beneath the ocean and 80,000 leagues above the ocean. And it is said that the Earth and the Sun and the Moon are going around the Mount Meru, almost at the same height, and then at the same height, and then it is said that the Moon and the Sun are almost same in size. That Sun is 1 league or yojana bigger than the Moon. But of course, I studied all this, but actually, the Sun is much more bigger than the Moon. But because of the distance of the Sun from the Earth, and there are some light. It is said that the Sun is light years away from the Earth, and because of that, we actually see the Sun small. So today, this modern science, mathematics, by using mathematical calculations, can actually calculate the distance of Sun and the Moon, and distance from between the Moon and the Earth, and the distance from between the Earth and the Sun, and so forth, very accurately. So even if we do not accept the existence of Mount Meru and so forth, as explained is described in our traditional text, it doesn't really harm the teaching of the Buddha as such. So you should not feel shocked when you are told that the Mount Meru does not exist as it is taught in the traditional text. So of course, Master Vasubandhu has actually explained this in Abhidhammakosha, but he was actually following what was prevalent belief at that time in India, in ancient India. So just because Mount Meru does not exist does not mean that we can reject also the teaching on the Four Noble Truths and the Two Truths. So these can be verified through logic, reasoning, and then also direct experience. So what science deals with is obvious objects. When we discuss with scientists, really, we discuss about the two truths, which also relates to the quantum physics. So science, modern science, actually does a lot of investigation into what is obvious, and therefore, regarding what is obvious, the empirical objects, science can be taken reliable. So when we talk about how things are interdependent and that there's nothing objectively existing, independently objectively existing, these are found to be quite amazing by scientists, modern scientists. So of course I do respect all religious traditions of the world. Whereas when we meet with scientists are some people who actually kind of remain rather distant from other religions. Whereas when we have discussions with scientists, I mean, the teachings of the Buddha relating to two truths, relating about two truths and the Four Noble Truths and so forth are something which we can actually prove. And so scientists are actually dealing with what is obvious. So anyone in the audience who wants to challenge me, so even if the Mount Meru were existent and it would be an impure, within the impure realm, and the sun and the moon also are within this realm of impurity. So in the past, I have, many years ago also, I have said to people that the reason and the purpose why the Buddha came to the world is not to measure the world, the distance from the sun and between the sun and the moon and sun, earth, and so forth, not to talk much about the cosmology as such, but to teach us the Four Noble Truths. And how, on the basis of understanding the Four Noble Truths, how do we go about with the practice of adopting certain things and discarding others? So if I don't explain in this way, some elderly people who make lots of mandala offerings, which is actually symbolically making offering, visualizing the cosmos according to the traditional teachings, might find it quite shocking. So you should know how the cosmos is explained in the by modern science and so forth, and also understand the teaching of the Buddha, which is called approach through logical reasoning, is.
Tevina Tepena Pene, Ripe, Samatan, Junsan Saman, Penata, Tapa Dubyanica, Nella Dubyanica, Nella Vekan, the Dubyana, Tapa the Pene, Tocha Yakan, the Penata, Ripe Saman, Concept, Pantanji, Five Corner, then Chunza Kobu, Shinto Kobu, the Kano, Yota to only Ripe goes to the Pantanja, something, and Yemen, and lungo la gente che tu sei ma tu più chiamo allora delle che tena sento più di Tsongkhapas e ne più una forma che non giugo lo che tu cose chiamo non giugo gito te negna Tsongkhapas soltanto gito se testa te che ne tieni giunzando gente la festa per cantare sembra da che giusto David Japan to take in the shape of computing to have go to the Chama. Tama would keep them, Topsa would keep them, request to say, take Tama to Tama, midnight from you, and Natoma to you can attend, also the Tonga can attend, Monju will go to Chama. In Monju is not some would keep them, science only, Mama demo to say, shut the Chama from Masama to say. And a shot man in Chama. As Kundu the table from the Penny, and the other day, that is in that for good be Sperado Shada and Yanko, and the Mina Mamika, Namaka, Table Chetana, Galda Mikata, Nika, Tezuutene, Yutanoko, you can set you. And Kundu the table said, Midnight Kundu Kanjiga, Kateketana, Anana, Special, you know, I know that they shot in your Biga Tsongkhapas Penela Kanto contradiction of the Galena, and it will kill Yanman also. And Kunduli Teneketana, Zodina Ketana, Viga Podena, Skarachati Chao, and then Zamni Buketana, Madame Disket Ketana, Leble, A. Silva, Viga Podena, the Kanji, Re Composite of Kan, a Re Mokoji, Pretty Coxitene, China, Lutan, Bachikan, Ketoa, Zapelita, and then Niman of David. Ora Japan Esperanza. And I take it out. Nima would get an Chichu Gazushi, Dao would get an Chichu Gazushi, they tap on a penny, shatter from those. And it couldn't tell us what a down there science day. Tusan Moko, Spente, and then Bafi, Gawa Chichu Gazushi, Nima Chichu Gazushi, they tap on Papa to the shatter council. They were done those and I shall come in the Catene to the man also. You would get an Mikton Lagdena, you can be that each and what I think you pay your child. And it's going to be table for one. Read about the transmission of my top child. When I was going to get an American and to go for the Skoraji, Japan, the Dumbling or the Skoraji types of child. Also for me, Simon Potene, the Chigaramata, of the Dumbling or the Skoraji. So he came up on child. So was communicate and read a Japo River and she Zodena Satan Malatene, it said the name, so Pogutene Chigan, Indian Chetanama, Kapachan, Home Sumo, the Tatana, Tula, Javana, and Kazu, Slatan, the Duke, the Shato Kazu, Duke, Sedon, Tukandi, and so on that and also. And it's communicated science Padam Yanko, Dandu Chuyan, Dandu Choto Chapo. Also, not Tsongkhapas and Dandu Chochato, and a ma, Demodo, Tena Chetan, Phone, and Dandu Zada, Spended is for Sacha, Benji, Denganese is for Sacha, then a psychology, Seven Hata, Shada Dada Nampo, Produ Dada Nampo, and Denvaran, Unit in Namjapan, Spended in Namjapan, Seven Namjapan, Napish, and a couple of clappers is Skonto. And the table and the science from the Shada Dada, whom Sante Tatuma, so the man, Chigate, kept on a bench at the corner, or something, so kept on a tail Zada Nampo, the Venice for the tenant, Songo Zada Nampo, and the quantum physics for the tenant. Quantum physics is for the Terrace of Tulu now, patient and Venice for the Terrace of Tulu, and the Tuska is at the tenant, con Natato Zatu. And the Jikena Chodu Mampo Yokapa, and a Jama Chodukone, Science and Yampo, and discussion and science and Yampo, produce trends that can depend as well on the Shadow and Yampo,
So generally speaking, dharma or religion is something that's needed. So in this world where we have lots of, there are people who only think about material development and progress alone, gaining wealth, property and so forth, and also name and fame. So is it sufficient to just pursue that? If it were the case that mere material development alone can give us peace of mind and mental development as well, then it's okay. But if you look at the world today, of course we see lots of natural disasters due to flood because of too much torrential rain, and then other times due to lack of water, rain, and so forth, starvation, and also harm through natural disasters through earthquake. So of course we cannot do much with regard to these. But today, most of the suffering that we face and experience are caused by us, created by us humans. So in the world, in the 20th century, there were the First World War and Second World War, the Vietnam War, Korean War, and how many people have died during these? Some historians say that it's over 200 million people died through these wars. But at this time, we are peaceful here, but at the same time in the Middle East and Arab regions, how many people are dying? How many people are dying of starvation in Africa? It's really sad, isn't it? So when we think about those sufferings and the problems caused by humans ourselves, of course, we know that all human beings want happiness and not suffering, whereas we are causing lots of problems by abusing others, bullying others, and then also problems due to the gap between rich and poor. These are really unfortunate. So the natural disasters are beyond our control, but the human-created problems can be changed and reduced by making transformation within human mind. So as a Buddhist, I'm a Buddhist monk and I practice Buddhism in my daily life, and I do think about the benefit of all sentient beings accordingly. So when we think about that, of course there are hundreds of millions of world systems, infinite number of world systems in fact, and then there are sentient beings living in these world systems. But other galaxies and other world systems, regarding them, we cannot do much. We can maybe say prayers for them. But on this earth also, there are, of course, many animals, like birds. I saw one bird up there in the temple where I am residing now. I heard a sparrow chirping. And I thought that I cannot do much for that sparrow except make prayer. and then other animals will live rather relaxed if there is no danger once they get their food. So for other animals, birds and so forth, we cannot do much for them. But what we can do, those for whom we can do something, are the 7 billion people on this earth. And because we have this human brain, the marvelous brain, if we could educate people well on, then of course we can do something to change the world. So directly or indirectly. So as we pray for all sentient beings, may I be able to liberate those who are not liberated, free those who are not freed, and lead those who to the omniscient state of Buddhahood, those who have not reached. So if these prayers are, if we really mean what we pray for, I mean, we should be practical about what we can do at the least. And so it is the 7 billion people on this earth for whom we can do something. And the way we can help 7 billion people is through secular ethics. Whether they are believers or non-believers doesn't really matter. Everyone can practice secular ethics. So one Indian politician, Advani, has said that in the past, in India, there was a philosophical school called Gyalwang, which was actually criticized by all other philosophical schools of India. So while they criticized the Gyalwang philosophy and its assertions, they do respect other traditions, respect the practitioners of Gyalwang tradition itself, referring them as rishis or sages. So Advani told me that in India, this tradition of respecting all religions, as well as those who have no religious belief, existed. And therefore, there is already this practice of secular ethics. And so the 7 billion people on this earth are the ones for whom we can do something. So all of them are those who want happiness and not suffering. We do not need to find reason, use logic to come to this conclusion. So this human brain that each and every one of us has is something unique, unlike the brains of animals. So of course the animals are not able to see the future. They cannot have far sight. They can only deal with what is immediate. So if you look at the birds, for example, of course they can think to a certain degree about building their nests in order to be able to lay their eggs and so forth. And so that the eggs could be laid in a safe nest, because they know that they will give birth to a child. So 7 billion people on Earth have this marvelous brain with which we can actually think about long-term effects and so forth. So if we look at ourselves, we can see that if you have peace of mind, you'll also have physical health. From my own experience, this is the case, although my peace of mind does not have any effect on my knee problem. Cannot solve that problem. So, but then I can see that it really has, this peace of mind has real effect on my physical health. So all humans on this earth, the 7 billion people, want peace of mind. So secular ethics is that means which can cover all 7 billion people. So this can be actually educated from kindergarten upwards, up to the highest universities. So this can be related in connection with the psychology. So after my visit in Ladakh, some people are actually in India itself, some people are working on secular ethics that can be introduced to the secular, the school systems. So in America, there's one city which is called the City of Compassion, and another city which is called the City of Compassion. So Anaheim and Louisville cities, respectively. So they do actually talk about love and compassion. So these cities have called themselves the City of Kindness. Having done that, City of Compassion and City of Kindness, have also followed some programs for children in the schools to have calm minds, calm states of mind, and not be agitated and so forth. The education on that, as well as serving others in the city. And accordingly, they have found that the children have become less restless and calmer and so forth. So they are not talking about future lives, rebirths or next life and so forth, but we are talking about here how to create an individual who is happy and peaceful, and through that, how to create a peaceful family and then a community and so forth. So if you have peace of mind, you are more happier. If you are agitated and angry, you will not have happiness. So use the school children and during one of my discussions with scientists, they actually presented a cartoon or an animation where the scientists showed two infants, two cartoons. In one of them, one child was trying to push a ball uphill, and then as and another child comes forward to help that child to push the ball upwards very happily. And when this was shown to an infant child who is just 6 months or who was 6 months old, before a pre-language child, this pre-language child, infant, actually expressed happiness by seeing that cartoon or animation. Whereas in another animation, the child who was trying to push ball uphill, was actually being obstructed by another child pushing the ball down. And when this was shown to the infant, this pre-verbal child, the child actually expressed unhappiness. And so from these experiments, the scientists make this conclusion that basic human nature is compassionate. So of course we were born from our mother, and we were breastfed by our mother with affection and care. You, the children, do you prefer the mother's smiling face and affection, or angry face? So if you play with your schoolmates, classmates, happily, you'll not even feel hungry. Whereas if you fight amongst yourselves, you feel rather unhappy, so agitated. So even animals appreciate love. And if you show stern face, angry face to them, then they also do not like it, do they? So therefore, for all humans, love, affection, and compassion is very crucial. It cannot be bought from the markets, but it's very valuable to us. So you need to understand the positive qualities of love and compassion and the disadvantages and shortcomings of the opposites of love and compassion, which is anger and so forth. So we need to, accordingly, by seeing the pros and cons of these, then we could actually enhance love and compassion and reduce those of the negative emotions. So between the physical and the mental pain and pleasure is more serious. So we need to actually deal with the constructive emotions and reduce the destructive ones. So if we could educate people right from childhood about how to build the constructive emotions and reduce the destructive ones, and we could help the humanity. So as a Buddhist practitioner, I do my best to give this message to the world. Just as we pray, may all those who are not liberated be liberated, and may those not freed be freed, and so forth.
tene sola sticana, sola mistica, tutto ducina, tene sola mistica lo che tene tutto stiu che ha. Più ha teresa ha buona che ha. Una giurate niente che ha. Perché tene Gyalwang denaro tene e ci va del canto secular del canto tene dopo che tene ma non nulla tene parte che ha più nulla che ha. Tene scudo di che tene temica secular ethics del tene scudo di detto tene sapere tene stanno femminile che tene da sì che tene ma etico che ci va con ciò che tene tutta madera samana tene sai gizzate per una serie di tene cadue come se la tantia tene community da sì ci va deportante e di Gyalwang tene secular del canto che tene sosi e on del giù corona sosi del canto sui sulla finanzi che le giudica che giù del canto tene cinci che Karmapa con che tene snarmana fanno io tene scudo che si agguane non tene giacca tene agguane non giacca tene fanno io discussion fanno io tene Gyalwang denvara non fanno tene secular esempio io del secondo tene che tene la prima charbat zakana tam che tene sono mistica che sono mistica di rite di Karmapa sono mistica di rite di Karmapa tene problem channel Tiwatiman channel denvara mana stewona tene mana kustegona tene problem dachas mene tene chiga Toronto Skonto Palano mana tene yoto che smadato tene sifo te chiga che mettiamo sono community lo sono tene e la Gyalwang tene la sono mistica te tu tene stubo tene mata scelta tene con la tene secular ethics del canto sono del canto in science del canto social studies del canto che tutti tene strategic stanti io sono tene che tene hatta tene in garden tene sin la tene sulla portani no stati strategic dirigi 다 미에도 상관한테 누가 좀자기 때로 좀 연구했죠. 그래서 지방은 주동내나 좀 민우파 정도가 세력에 되는 돈을 이루주체 잡히 전투에 대해 두지나 집회 상식사태도 뭐가 그 지방은 코로나 추울 때는 제가 강자세 때 때문에 아주 상승할 때는 스포츠 때 보는 때 점프 때 추울 때는 민우 때 때도 나타나는 samotiko na tanti chapuduto peduto e nella girata per orgulli che ne santi fatto la e le orgullo che na io che ama uri e ne nima torno di un canale che poi che tu ci ga tutto mia mouse che con la sabata che tipo io chiamo dico che tutto la tutto se c'hanno di domani se c'è che non con le dici c'è samotante santo c'è che dove sta fanno la scelta perché la inge sante delle inge buona da c'è bene come c'è delle giure c'è si delle stati c'è metà sono perché c'è una mia che giura c'è delle tanto io che no come sa mi non che inge sentono della inge sta come detto semi scida io che inge da semi scida io che di c'è tutto la community usana inge butetena denvara kyola na pate storusi chona che butetena che tu butetena yage butetena tantani che no per la community da America che butetena conche video che conche che con kind city da chicola city of compassion da chicola city of kindness che tu attacchi che altro temina che tena sulla foto tanta con che tena inti torna tene santa inti torna tene tanka dicate e yude non tene sulla tene conto de sana tene ci tene io tene sta con ma dopo e tu tratandi tutto ma to somma sanara inti de kana tene da te tanta de kana tene sigla ni sigla io tene tene tanti no e tu la tene zitena 기존은 때는 때문에 아바니 잘했던 잘았어 엄마가 잘았어 엄마가 손톱만 가지고 있더라 기뻐 영원히는 그러면 나로가 되니 mana chansa no nyampo, seva no nyampo, thasa no nyampo, chansa chana tuska so vabu sana metyanje. Nyam ketena tati te duga digu so tetene nyampa chana tusna duga isu usnama jite karana na kore to so. Yo membre chu jik, so tene kartun jik dugu mala kana, naksa jik so te dugu mala. Naksa jik chi na tene chu gun tene chu jik gen na statu mala. Yang chu guni yato so te gen na staran jik tene 제가 그렇게 어디 이제 내내 항상 그냥 나타난 게 그렇죠. 그 남자도 노트 다와트 소간에 주제가 타는 냐고 그 주도 못도 소마라 소마사 그 주부비나 되게 그래서 나타도 되고 역간도 과 되게 통계 과 고자도 양 남자들이 좀 뭐야 주지 되는 게나 스타트 양 주지 스타는 또 양 주지 용페나 그 이마 텐테 쿠테 리테 계속 나타나는 편이 납작이도 뭐 세우게 되는 양때 바로 공간에 또 나타나는 또 코노테에 세면 미디자 좀때 코노테에 또 되는 마토마 만두스코 상관고 스페라탄 땅시산에 있는 필로가스 나타나기 때문에 자라였잖아 투에 역간비 되게 주비나 되게 가와탄 때문에 두칸 그 나타나요 자 चारपा दर्शन होता हूँ बीजे दर्शन उससे मिसे नहीं क्या तो यादें समझने चाहिए क्या खोटो दर्शन मिसे तो गोसान हो कुले कुले तेने नातां के जो ये दोनों तेने दर्शन जो जैसे खासे लबार ना तो ये मिल चाहिए क्या तो तेने दारिश मंदिर होना चिची गुसाले तेना कुले क्यों ना ते संगीत में ना जिसे नस्कोचे सोचे तेना कॉस्मोलॉजी जिसे छात्रों कोला तेने शब्द दर्शन मास्टर क्या वाला संगीत में ना कहते ना मिये युक्तन दुमा जंके यूज करते जो मेथन चलते तेने थाचे संते दुमा लगाते थावन तना तेने स्टोर दाचाना देते उसको
यार बात नहीं इधर ज़रूरी दीवाना
So irrespective of whether people are followers of believers in religion or not, all 7 billion people, through education, should be educated in love and compassion in order to create, so that we could actually create a compassionate world. Therefore, with my friends, scientists and educationists, and many of them are working for this. Through education, they're working to promote love and compassion through education. And therefore, all of us here, including myself, we are part of the 7 billion people on this earth. So you need to give thought to this. We all of us make this prayer. May all sentient beings have happiness and the cause of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and its cause. So, if this is real, if you really mean by these prayers, then we need to do something. So where we can do something. And then in the promotion of love and compassion, we need to do it on the one hand through secular ethics. And secondly, there are many different religious traditions on this earth. There are those theistic religious traditions and non-theistic religious traditions, and those that assert an independent self and those who reject independent self. But all of them have the same common practice of love and compassion, such as the practitioners of Christianity and Muslim, the practitioners of Islam and so forth, do practice the love and compassion, whether they are Hindus or Jains, Zoroastrianism and Jews and so forth. I mean, all of them practice love and compassion. if you just say that you are a follower, you are a Buddhist or Christianity is Muslim and so forth, merely in words, then that doesn't really mean much. But we have real practitioners, genuine practitioners in all religious traditions. Saint Francis of Assisi has a prayer which is very similar to the prayers we find in the Bodhisattva Charya Avatara by Shantideva. So in all the religious traditions, we have this common practice of love, compassion, patience, and tolerance, forgiveness, contentment. I've been to many Christian monasteries where I have found the monks living very humble life. There's a simplicity. And so there's a practice of contentment in them, whereas in our monasteries, the monks have lots of stuff in their houses. So I have seen really good practitioners in other traditions, religious traditions, living a very humble life. And then also there's the practice of self-discipline in all the religious traditions. So not only giving lip service to whichever religious tradition you are following, if you're a practitioner of the religious tradition that you profess as your religion, then you can see that in all the religious traditions and have the potential to promote and enhance the practice of love and compassion. And therefore, it is very important for all the religious traditions to be harmonious. In Ladakh, between the Muslim practitioners and then the Buddhist practitioners. And here in Nubra also, you have a very close, friendly relationship with between the Muslims and the Buddhists. So yesterday, the Muslim speaker from the said that in the future, when this kind of when the summer debate happens, is held, the Muslims will also take part. It's very good, isn't it? So from amongst all the religious traditions, what Buddhism can actually contribute to other religions is through the knowledge of psychology, and also through the understanding of dependent origination, we can serve other religious traditions, contribute to them. So I have a very good friend who was really a staunch supporter of Tibetan issue. And we have lots of discussions. We used to have discussions on cultivating single-pointed concentration, shamatha, and so forth. And one day, this Christian minister asked me about emptiness. And I told him, don't ask about this. This is a Buddhist business. It's not your business. So because when we talk about dependent origination of things, what this actually says is that nothing is absolute. And because of that, you can understand that there is no absolute God as such, and therefore I thought that it might if he took interest in this, his faith might be underestimated by this teaching on dependent origination. So in India, of course, there is the understanding of law of causality, and in order to explain past and future lives, the religious traditions came up with this idea of an Atma, or an independent self or soul, which is said to have come from the past to the present life, and from this life that it will go to the future life. And so this is explained on the basis of law of causality as well. Whereas in Buddhism, It is said that things are merely designated, just as a chariot is designated on the basis of its parts put together in a certain dimension. Likewise, a person is designated on the basis of his or her psychophysical aggregates, and these psychophysical aggregates also have the degrees of subtlety. The coarse one, slightly subtle, and then the most subtle. And the Buddhism asserts that things, there's no independent self, but the self is merely designated. So I have very good practitioners amongst friends who are practitioners, sincere practitioners amongst the Christians, Jews, Muslims, and so forth. For example, we can have the example of Mother Teresa, who was really dedicated for the well-being of others, and there are many others like her who really serve humanity, and therefore it is very important to have religious harmony. Now here we are gathered for the teaching of the Buddha, to deal with the teaching of the Buddha. So as soon as he became enlightened, the Buddha said, I have found or discovered this Dharma, which is nectar-like, which is profound, unfabricated, peaceful, uncompounded, and clarity, clear light. If I were to teach this to others, nobody will understand me, and therefore I'll remain silent in the forest. So what he was saying was that this teaching on selflessness, rejecting any kind of independent soul or Atman, cannot be understood by the people at that time, who were more or less used to the idea of an Atman, an independent self. And therefore the Buddha said he will remain silent in the forest. As time went by and people became more and more receptive to this kind of teaching on selflessness, then when the Buddha was requested to turn the wheel of Dharma, he gave the teaching on the Four Noble Truths in Saranath, and gave the teachings on the Four Noble Truths, and each of these Four Noble Truths were also explained through the four aspects each, where, for example, the aspects of impermanence, nature of suffering, emptiness, and the selflessness, with regard to that of the Noble Truth of suffering. And then he also taught the 37 factors of enlightenment, such as the four foundations of mindfulness and four miraculous feet and so forth. So he taught emptiness and selflessness right at the first sermon, during the first sermon. So this is because Buddha taught that of true cessation. So cessation here means cessation of suffering, which cannot just happen without any causes and conditions, and therefore he taught selflessness. So this true cessation of suffering must come through a means by which the causes of suffering can be stopped and eliminated and stopped. And therefore, in this elaborating the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha gave teaching on the 12 links of dependent origination, which begins with ignorance. And so because of ignorance of what reality is, we create suffering. And therefore, the opposite of what ignorance holds on to can be understood, and through that understanding and wisdom we can eliminate this ignorance. And therefore the ignorance is said to be temporary or adventitious. So the mind or consciousness has this quality or the nature of being knowing things. And this can be enhanced and developed further, and ignorance or these adventitious negativities can be eliminated. And then when the Buddha taught the true cessation in greater detail, he gave the teachings of the perfection of wisdom. And in the perfection of wisdom teachings, he taught the selflessness or emptiness, the 4 types and or 16 and so forth. So during the first turning of the wheel of the Dharma, the Buddha taught selflessness, and he was not talking so much about the person. Whereas in the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, which is the teaching on the perfection of wisdom, teachings of perfection of wisdom, he taught that not only a person is empty of any independent existence, but also the psychophysical aggregates on the basis of which a person is designated are also empty of any independent existence. And then he goes on further to explain emptiness and the Buddha nature in the third turning. In the Heart Sutra, we find mention of the fourfold emptiness, when the Buddha stated the form is empty, emptiness is form, form is not other than emptiness, and emptiness is not other than form. So we can relate the same phrase to ourselves, saying, I'm empty, emptiness is me, I'm not other than emptiness, and emptiness is not other than me. And similarly, it can be related to a flower. So why empty? Why are things empty? Is because they are dependent on other causes and conditions. And therefore, things exist by way of dependence on other factors. And therefore, when you try to search for things in themselves, their identity in themselves, you will not be able to pinpoint anything as being this or that. And therefore, this is very similar to what quantum physicists say, that things have no objective independent existence. Whereas things do not have any independent objective existence, and yet we cannot deny the existence of things themselves as such. So how about that? Then, because things affect us, we experience things. We have experiences on the basis of the other things. And because of that, we cannot deny the experience and the existence of things. And although things do exist, they do not have any independent existence. And therefore, dependently originated things, because things are dependent, we can say they are empty of independent existence. And because they are empty of independent existence, doesn't mean that which doesn't mean that things are nothing, but they come about through causes and conditions, dependent on other factors. And so when it comes to teaching on emptiness, I have quite a bit of experience. And therefore, emptiness is something which can be corroborated or verified from one's experience. And therefore, the Buddha said that we must examine his teaching. And therefore, when we do analyze his teaching through logic and reasoning, we can find the Buddha's teachings very beneficial and relating to facts and reality. And so, the understanding of emptiness can complement our practice of bodhicitta, this altruistic spirit of enlightenment. So this is the spirit of enlightenment is considered as the method or the skillful means, and the understanding of emptiness as that of the aspect of wisdom. And so these should be combined. These two, the method and the wisdom, should be combined in our practice of spirituality. As long as I was asking the children, the students, whether they can get something. Cherbusana Sanskrit na lakhare. No. There's another word for cherpu. Naked.
I don't know the word.
Thank you. Naked ones. Nilkant? No. Digambara. Digambara, Svetambara. There are two. Svetambara. Those who just wear only a loincloth. Digambara is totally naked. They consider the sky to be their cloth.
Tene Disket tene spera soma di tanto sonte, tene te tu le cane te nigo ne tene tu la tato jo jama mongo jo jama tu tu la te ma so che ho. Te stimolo tene tene sangi podan da yako yamen zata ne tene for tene swam yo tap te han tene jiste yo kan bijate. Tene yera lamana sopa soma di spese yo te go tene yera lamana soma da te yo yako tene tene sangue che tena guarda che tene dendaji sotto lo so che ha dendaji sotto lo so ma denga no zamu che ha tene denga rere de tene ji che te tutto che ha tena doma mista doma sto da te che giura che sempre te ji tene gopaji wa jano ni tene lang di pa ni ju de te tu vai ji che te Beji is not Kamama, Zamu is so much the Kiasa. Teletena, Dagmeta, so what on Dagmete, Kontapateta, Rapagi, so another Kiama. Testimona, Tele Tagotupe, Tagotupa, Tele Shesi, those so other than Dagmete, Kontapateta, no, Kama, Darete Bechetana, Kantara Dagmeta, Ika Jetana, Tele Sushi Dameso, Tele matata te semena tua yokane marika yendo kabute tena naluko tele usha te yokane tele snamaji matana sanji matana yotena tele ke tena wase mato to tsongkane tele lobo skego te kana so mata kate wase snadu ko ha gona nyampo dare se chukane lobo ke tena mekan yutse kana so mata tele jate matana te kadu se thona Tongkan tongkan menyeka sosok semacam sosok yang ada tongku nota tewas tente sekane sangku begitu macam tu temukan bisa te temukan mereka kerja so nanti nama betul mana kau mereka jadi kondisi kerjanya ada tentang modal juga kan jadi itu macam tente kalau mereka itu so hawan so ha jadi dari situ bukan jiwa nyatu kerja sekarang Gop berkani secara bicara tidak mahu dari mana datang yukane sulte lobo gop nolak teruketena metan yukan teruketena sama yukan ditene sahaja teruketena gop dan teruketena terumi sama terbiasa teruketena ote terumuzma bu kampu teruketena standard teruketena ini teruketena siapa siapa ini mana kalau datang ini songit ji datang ke sana dengan zuk tombol pemain mereka pemain datang zuk yang main no datang natur tene ciki khapa jase pe itu damin dan itu dua orang datang kalau contoh berkaitan to jalan yang po ciki state itu kan apa no state jalan yang po ramu dengan kan apa no so macam state itu contoh itu macam itu jalan dia cara Ini cara tiga yang mata orang tu jiwa no, jiwa tu cuma solat tu yang ada nama takut sahaja senang tu misalnya te mata mungkin tena misalnya apa mana boleh tahan. Tunggu samara jatuh jangan mata jalan korang step mana ini te mata panu teni tena te panu te satu bekan te yukan dijate jatuh jangan mata itu yukan Anu dekat bijak, YouTube berkaitan jika nanti tu si YouTube berkait terapan yang mana ming tambah dekat ke satamu itu dua jauh sama. Tewas sombatan nara, ini sambil tambah dasar tapi kada ada mereka suci dalam sama berkaitan sesi itu nama macam itu dengar orang hal macam ni sekarang tak boleh jauh sama.
Oh ya. jadi itu sana itu
So during the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, which a part of which is the Sandinimochana Sutra, which if you are, which was taught to those for whom, if they took literally the teaching of the perfection of wisdom, literally, then they may fall into nihilism. And therefore, the Buddha said that all compounded phenomena are of dependent nature, and then the dualistic appearance of subject and object is said to be that of the imputed nature, and then he taught that the subject and the object are non-dual, and therefore he taught the non-dual emptiness of emptiness, which is non-duality of the subject and object, which is the perfect nature. And therefore, when in the second turning of the wheel, the Buddha said that everything from form up to omniscience has no intrinsic existence, he actually, in the third turning, the Sandinimochana Sutra, it is said that he actually taught this with these three natures in mind, the dependent, the imputed, and the perfect nature in mind, saying that and then another aspect of the third turning of the wheel of Dharma is the Tathagata Garbha Sutra. Whereas in the second turning, the perfection of wisdom teachings, what is mainly emphasized explicitly is the emptiness, which is the ontological status of things. Whereas in this third turning, the Tathagata, essence of Tathagata, the subjective mind, which realizes emptiness, is emphasized. And then, through this, the disciples are led into the tantric, esoteric teachings. And therefore, in the Dzogchen tradition, the emphasis is on this clear light mind. And also, Mahamudra emphasizes the clear light of mind. And so all the tantric teachings, whether it's Dzogchen or Mahamudra and so forth, mainly focuses on this clear light mind. And so the teachings that are found in the Sutrayana lays the foundation for the esoteric tantric teachings, leading the disciples. So Gongdang Tenpe Döme has actually said that all these teachings, that the spectrum of teachings that the Buddha gave, from beginning with the sutra teachings, and then the tantric, within the sutra, the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma. The first turning teaches the selflessness, second turning emphasizes more elaborately teachings emptiness, and emptiness, which is the ontological status of things, and then the third turning, which is the Tathagata Garbha Sutra, emphasizes that the subjective clear light mind, and then this leads into those of the tantric practices. So this is like, so Gongdang Tenpe Döme has actually said, use the analogy of climbing a mountain from the bottom going up to the top regarding this teaching. So following the teaching of the Buddha through this kind of, with the critical approach, where we go through rejecting the assertions of others, establishing one's own assertion, and then rejecting any criticism to that. And when you do that, then sometimes scholars have used very harsh words. For example, Bhavaviveka in his Tarkajvala, which is a commentary to his own text, Lamp of the Middle Way, has actually said that Asanga, who was the founder of the Chittamatra philosophical tradition or school, was someone shameless because of interpreting the teaching of the Buddha, which is different from that of the Arya Nagarjuna's tradition. And so it's important for us to use our critical faculty and delve into the teaching of the Buddha, the profound teachings, and not just follow based on our blind faith. And so, as an introduction to the teaching of the Buddha, I'll go through the middle volume of the Stages of Meditation, which is on page 77. The English is on page 77.
유산에 오산도 대두가자테 평가독식 스마가자테 때문에 평가독식 나상주에 송대죠. 결국 된바람 하나씩 이노 오서 때문에 데리마다 모토조차도 다세이 때문에 이 스나도 pokazu치요 대부 송대가 이 스나도 때문에 연내는 거고 제대로 나가 고민 받거나 주주께서 때문에 가사군이 나란데 가사군이 때문에 대부 제가 다시 상계대 수만의 대파자는 냠포 스토파 가자 스톰스미고나 때문에 남자고 때문에 샤다다데 차서 그분 런던 제디 때문에 오메 사페지 때문에 대파 스토게 바로데 때문에 때문에 제가 센터데 때문에 삼촌도 사하고 갔대 저가 때문에 그분 통메디 상계대 수모 때문에 센터에 수는 대자도 머리가노 뭐대답이 sigmana supposing sunte teate tedu date tene karja fanku tene rangu jak pratikte gona chana tene toju visera praktikmene yongchane tasa sombasan nalan de tene kedishan bucha tena handa janme chiz de to tantan ha go chute tene ran rike samlo tanse tego ka testing mana korana tu samosha testing mana teda topas pang de tene itu tene secha dave senjin do botane sange tongka nangsinga tantan chikchik yo na tebana tene ga jak sponsor me gona tene analysis te tene satsu ji ko malan de kate satsu tesu ma kapu ji no tebi ketena toju chikpe ga ma cha tene samju ga chano tebi ji na choba tate ko ketena yamen chocha de skor ko ketena tene gomin parte kana tene sala dave
So this middle volume of the stages of meditation shows how to go about with meditation generally. And then in the 37 practices of Bodhisattva, when you, what it teaches is when you focus on the cultivation of the spirit of enlightenment, it touches on not being attached to these preoccupations and pleasures of this life and also the pleasures of the next life, and not getting attached to samsara and so forth. As taught in the Abhisamaya Alamkara, making an offering of mandala as a request for the teaching. May the sound of the great drum of Dharma dispel the suffering of sentient beings. May you live for eons. Inconceivable teaching. So whatever teaching we engage in, the disciples should listen with a pure motivation. The teacher must have a pure motivation to help sentient beings, to help the disciples, and not to have this wish to gain wealth, money, or name, and so forth. And the disciples also must not think that you are going to receive the teaching with ulterior motives, such as to just be able to count how many times you have received, you have been able to receive the teachings, and so forth. Just but to have the pure motivation. Not to have any kind of arrogance to have for having received many teachings from me. So let's say the prayer for taking refuge and bodhicitta. To the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I'm enlightened. Through the practice of the generosity and so forth that I've done, may I become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. The teaching of the Buddha is a means to overcome all our diseases of the three poisons, the destructive emotions. And therefore, I will teach in the language of humans, asuras, and gods. I homage to the Gautama, who, moved by his compassion toward the sacred Dharma, to rid us of the distorted views. So the Master Nagarjuna has said that all the Buddhas taught their teachings on the basis of the two truths, which are the conventional and the ultimate. And then Shantideva also in Bodhisattva Charya Avatara, Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life, says that all these branches of teachings were taught by the sage for the cultivation, for developing wisdom. And so this wisdom is the wisdom realizing the ultimate truth. So of the 17 Nalanda masters, one of the master Shandadrakshita, philosophically speaking, he was the follower of the Madhyamaka, the middle way school of philosophy, a follower of Master Nagarjuna, and within the Madhyamaka philosophical school, he also follows the sub-school of Madhyamaka, which also incorporated the philosophical assertions of Chittamatra, the mind-only school, which rejects any external existence in things. And therefore, according to Shagya tradition, the Sakya scholars' tradition, they have a saying that they have this term, the higher or upper Sarvatandrika Madhyamakas. So because Chittamatra philosophical school is considered one of the highest schools of philosophy within Buddhism, therefore those who follow the Chittamatra philosophical assertions within the Madhyamaka, the middle way school, are termed as higher Sarvatantrika Madhyamakas. Whereas Bhaviveka does assert the external existence of external phenomena, external things, and therefore the Sarvatantrika Madhyamaka philosophical school of Bhaviveka is termed as the lower Sarvatantrikas. So these two terms, Sarvatantrika Yogacara Sarvatantrika Madhyamaka, is considered higher, and the Sotantrika Sarvatantrika Madhyamaka are considered the lower Sarvatantrika Madhyamakas. And so Shandadrakshita wrote texts on Madhyamaka philosophy, such as the Ornament of Madhyamaka and its commentary, and then and also he wrote the Tatuv Samgraha, which is like the compendium of the reality. And his main disciple, Kamalashilas, wrote other texts like the Madhyamaka Aluka, the lamp or the light of Madhyamaka, which he may have written when he was in India. And then he wrote a commentary to his master's text on epistemology, Tatav Samgraha, which is called Tatav Samgraha Panjika, the difficult points, explanation of the difficult points of Tatav Samgraha. And then he also wrote this text, the 3 books of the stages of meditation, the first, second, the middle, and the last. And so I find that this has special significance for Tibetans. After Chandrakshita passed away, and then there were certain Chinese monks in Samye Monastery, the Tibetan Buddhist, first Buddhist monastery of Tibet. There were, of course, those masters, the Chinese masters who were doing single-pointed concentration, meditation, during the time of Chandrakshita himself. Of course, when he was alive, they were very good followers of the Chinese followers of meditation. So Chandrakshita started the monastic ordination by first testing 7 Tibetan boys, whether the Tibetans, to test whether the Tibetans could keep the monastic vows or not. And then when he found that they could, he went forward with giving the ordination. And then within the Samye compound, the Samye monastic complex, there was a department of the tantric practitioners who were called the Gogar Changlöde, and there was this other department of the celibacy. And then within the monastic, the meditation department of there were Chinese meditators, and who later on, after Chandrakshita, so began to say that for enlightenment, to achieve Buddhahood, there's no need for study of the Dharma. Mere meditation is enough for reaching Buddhahood. And so there are even today some Japanese people who do assert such things. I have met with students who have asked me questions about whether meditation, single-body meditation alone is sufficient for enlightenment. And therefore, because of this kind of misconception happened in Samye Monastery at the time, in the 8th and 9th centuries after Chandrakshita passed away, then the Kamalashilas, who was the chief disciple of Chandrakshita, was invited to Samye, to Tibet, and therefore he had debate with the Chinese masters. And then after that debate, he wrote these 3 books, the first, the second, and the third book of stages of meditation. And this is rather the second volume, or the middle volume of the stages of meditation is rather not too long, not too short. So maybe I am thinking too much. So Adisha came to Tibet in the 10th, 11th centuries, and he wrote The Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment. And he was invited by Changjubu, who was the nephew of Ishiwu, who actually initially had the intention to invite Adisha to Tibet, and lost his life in the process in the hands of some evil king called Karlok king. And then at that time, of course, Tibet was fragmented, in a state of fragmentation, and even the Ladakhi king at that time actually bullied the Tibetan descendant of the Tibetan king, like so before that, of course, during the times of Songchen Gampo, Tisung Detsen, and so forth, even Tibet was a very powerful nation, even invading China and Afghanistan area and so forth. Some university, I think it was University of Columbia, some scholars have done, actually investigated in the Chinese documents and found that in the 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries, there were 3 empires: Mongol, China, and Tibet empires. But later, from the 9th century onwards, Tibet became rather fragmented, and there was a very small principality ruled by the descendants of Ngari, the Tibetan kings in the Ngari region of Tibet. And they were really weak in terms of power, and whereas therefore they were not very powerful militarily and so forth. Whereas during the time of Tsongkhapas and so forth, Tibet was very powerful, and at that time, of course, the kings or the emperors may be very self-confident, optimistic about whatever they did. So Adisha came to Tibet, of course, wrote the pamphlet for the Path to Enlightenment, but I don't think Kamalashila would be any less popular than Adisha. And so this text was requested by the Tibetan Emperor Tsongkhapas and written by Kamalashila in Tibet. And therefore, I consider it to have some significance to teach this text. So, regarding the transmission of this text, book, I am really eager to receive transmissions of teachings, explanatory transmissions especially. And one time when I was in Bodh Gaya, I met with the Sakya abbot of Sakya Monastery, Khenpo Sangye Tenzin, and I found out that he had the transmission of the book, the 3 books of the stages of meditation, which he received in Samye. And so when I found out this, I actually requested this teaching, and therefore that's how I received the transmission. So when I was with some few Ladakhi counselors or officials, I said that when Tibet became very weak at the time of the Yeshivu and Changju and so forth in the 9th, 10th, 11th centuries, even Ladakh kings bullied the Tibetans. We have not forgotten this, I told them. I was joking with them, of course.
Translation department, there are some Sanskrit and Apostolic Yucha, Tene suwa gom japkane tesanchi department somchi. Tene ketena suwa yang shmasi nyame chokane tesanchi. Tene tola Gyalwang jisuli tene nyame chokane tesanchi so. Kisu ketena gompa te gompa vinante yucha so. Tene ketena I chigabo ketena sogon ta chiga Kamalashilas ta cha so. Kamalashilas bo ketena tene dasi chige sogon Concise Buddhista tene formacha, tene pena chetena, dafi gom chate tene department mena, tene jana tene hasam, gom chapana, te tu sola jala chasa, te thama tene yang isuwa hasana yung setena, tapik stone shote, gom chipo japna, jina chipo gom na tene, sangya sano, de jana sano cha, mata, tene tona tene, sangya sano, jogom chipe gona, Samgyasano, Verkane, Esu Gom Japane Jana Rasandu,
So regarding the Chandarakshita, the great abbot Chandarakshita, he was a great logician, a great scholar of logic and epistemology. So during the time of Dignaga, there was a lot of debate and arguments with non-Buddhist scholars. And then after that, there were non-Buddhist scholars who criticized Dignaga's position on logic and epistemology, and therefore Dharmakirti came and he challenged and answered those of the non-Buddhist criticisms. And later on, there were other non-Buddhist scholars who again criticized and challenged Dharmakirti's epistemology and logic and the tradition, and therefore Chandarakshita came up later to answer and face those challenges. And so both Chandrakshita and his chief disciple Kamalashila were really great logicians. And therefore, the study of logic also spread to Tibet. And the system of logic and debate became prevalent in Tibet. Chaba Chujisenki and so forth devised the system of debate in Tibet. And Sakya Pandita also wrote his text on epistemology. And in Tibet, the tradition that we follow in terms of philosophical tradition, we follow the Madhyamaka philosophy, the middle way philosophy, and that is followed on the basis of by using the reasonings in the epistemological tradition. And so there is this term used in Tibet which is called the yoked necks of Madhyamaka, the middle way school, and the logic. Dish. So the great, out of the 17 Nalanda masters, who followed logic, the only followers or who actually have kept up with this tradition of logic, using logic and reasoning for study, is only amongst Tibetans. And because Ladakhis, you also follow the same tradition, you need to also keep up with this tradition of logic and reasoning. Please, we're going to go through the text. It's on English. It's on begins on page 77 in this book. Homage to the Youthful Manjushri, the middle volume of Stages of Meditation. So in the Tibetan text, there's, in the language of India, Bhavanakrama, in the language of Tibet, Gomrim Parpa, which translates as the Stages of Meditation in English. So homage. So the reason why the title is mentioned in Indian language is to show the authenticity of the teaching, the source of the teaching. And homage to the Youthful Manjushri is a homage paid by the translator. So in accordance with the decree, there was established, the tradition that was established according to the decree of the Tibetan Emperor Tisong Detsen, during whose time the translations of the great classic texts was mainly carried out. So when the texts were being translated, the emperor's advice was sought, and he came up with this instruction that if if the text comes within the category of sutras, then the homage should be paid to Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and then if it falls under the category of the Abhidharma, then the homage should be paid to Manjushri, and then for those texts which have to do with monastic discipline, the homage is paid to the omniscient one. And so accordingly, this was followed. So in the Pali tradition also, there is the Abhidharma scriptures, and these are termed as the lower Abhidharma, whereas in the Abhisamaya Alankara tradition, it is said the Panchaparami, the perfection wisdom teachings, are higher Abhidharma. So, of course, we have the two classes of Abhidharma, which are called the lower and the higher Abhidharmas, which is to say the Abhidharma Koshakarika is considered the lower Abhidharma, and then Abhidharma Samuchaya considered as the higher Abhidharma. But here, the higher and lower is not according to this kind of tradition, but the understanding of the teaching of ultimate reality, of emptiness. On the basis of that, the Prajaparamita texts are considered higher Abhidharma. So as I have already explained yesterday, that there are three phases of developing understanding of the teachings. First is based on merely hearing the teaching, listening to the teaching, and then the second is developed on the basis of reflection. And then you go into that of understanding that is drawn through meditation. And so we need to combine both the analytical meditation and the focusing, single-pointed meditation. So because there was this debate with the Chinese monks, here Master Kamalashilas is emphasizing both the study and meditation. So he says, I shall briefly explain the stages of meditation for those who follow the system of Mahayana Sutras. The intelligent, that in the Tibetan, the word that for intelligent that is given, the spelling is wrong. It shouldn't have the final S. So this is referring to those who follow the teaching on the basis of reason, the ones with sharper faculty, who wish to actualize omniscience, extremely quickly should make a deliberate effort to fulfill its causes and conditions. So here again you can see this relates to the law of cause and effect, dependent origination in terms of that law of causality. It is not possible for omniscience to be produced without causes, because if it were, everything could always be omniscient. So now here you can find the arguments. So because omniscience must come through causes and conditions, therefore, it is important, we must know what causes and conditions lead to that. If things were produced without reliance on something else, they could exist without constraint. There would be no reason why everything could not be omniscient. So we can also say why everything could be omniscient as well. So if things were produced without reliance on something else, so both could and could not be said here. Therefore, since all functional things arise only occasionally, they depend strictly on their causes. Omniscience too is rare because it does not occur at all times in all places, and everything cannot become omniscient. So when we study the primer, logic primer, we learn about the established objects, existence, and objects of knowledge and so forth. And objects of knowledge is divided into those that are compounded phenomena and those that are uncompounded phenomena, or the existence is categorized into these two. Therefore, it says all functional things arise only occasionally. In that case, if you ask, the uncompounded phenomena, which are the qualities of the Buddha, do they not come through causes and conditions? So because the Buddhas have gone through the training of the paths and the Bodhisattva grounds, they have attained those qualities within themselves. Of course, they are dependent on causes and conditions. So we make this distinction that they are dependent on causes and conditions, but they are not brought about by. They are not the fruits of causes and conditions as such. Omniscience too is rare. Therefore, it definitely depends on causes and conditions. Also, from among these causes and conditions, you should cultivate the correct and complete causes. So the causes must be correct and complete. If you put the wrong causes into practice, even if you work hard for a long time, the desired goals cannot be achieved. It will be like milking a cow's horn. Likewise, the result will not be produced when all the causes are not put into effect. For example, if the seed or any other cause is missing, then the result, a sprout and so forth, will not be produced. Therefore, those who desire particular results should cultivate its complete and unmistaken causes and conditions. So not only the causes should be complete, but you should not be confused regarding the sequence of the practices. So in order to sow a seed, to have a sprout or a harvest, we need to sow the seed at the right time with the right manure, fertilizer, heat, and so forth, and water and so forth. We should not put too much water and nor too little and so forth. If you ask what are the causes and conditions of final fruit of omniscience, I, who am like a blind man, may not be in a position to explain. But I shall employ the Buddha's own words. So here again the Tibetan words for the Buddha's own words is spelling mistake, has a spelling mistake. Just as he spoke to them, to his disciples after his enlightenment, he said, Vajrapani, Lord of Secrets, the sense and wisdom of omniscience has its roots in compassion, arises from a cause, the altruistic thought, the awakening mind of bodhicitta, and the perfection of skillful means. So the perfection of skillful means refers to the 6 perfections. So in the study of Panchaparamita, on the basis of Abhidhamaya Alamkara, we come across lots of places where the 6 perfections are referred. Therefore, if you are interested in achieving omniscience, you need to practice these: compassion, the awakening mind of bodhicitta, and skillful means. Moved by compassion, bodhisattvas take the vow to liberate all sentient beings. Then, by overcoming their self-centered outlook, they engage eagerly and continuously in the very difficult practice of accumulating merit and insight. Having entered into this practice, they will certainly complete a collection of merit and insight. Accomplishing the accumulation of merit and insight is like having omniscience itself in the palm of your hand. Therefore, since compassion is the only root of omniscience, you should become familiar with this practice from the very beginning. The companion of perfect Dharma reads, "O Buddha, a bodhisattva should not train in many practices. If a bodhisattva properly holds to one Dharma and learns it perfectly, he has all the Buddha's qualities in the palm of his hands. And if you ask what that one Dharma is, it is great compassion." So you should put a naro on the ha at the end, which is missing. The Buddhas have already achieved all the own objectives, but remain in the cycle of existence for as long as there are sentient beings. This is because they possess great compassion. They also do not enter the immensely blissful abode of nirvana like the heroes. Considering the interest of sentient beings, first they abandon the peaceful abode of nirvana. So considering the interest of sentient beings, first they abandon the peaceful abode of nirvana as if it were a burning iron house. Therefore, great compassion alone is the unavoidable cause of non-abiding nirvana of Buddha. So, regarding the state of Buddhahood, in Nagarjuna's Nubra Valley, the precious garland, it says this verse, if oneself and for the sake of oneself and others, one wishes to achieve the highest enlightenment, one should be rooted in the compassion, the spirit of enlightenment, and understanding of emptiness. And so those practitioners of the Mahayana, the Bodhisattva path, who are of sharp faculty, first develops the understanding into emptiness, and therefore, through that understanding, they are able to confirm that the great enlightenment, Buddhahood, is possible. And therefore, they are able to teach, lead others to the state of Buddhahood by attaining Buddhahood for themselves. And therefore, bodhicitta, which is defined as that wish or the aspiration to Buddhahood, to attain Buddhahood for the benefit of others, must be achieved through this understanding of emptiness. Because when you come across the word Buddha, which in Tibetan is Sangye, Sang, meaning overcoming all the defilements, shortcomings within ourselves, and Ge means having this full understanding of everything. And therefore, you need to develop this understanding of emptiness to overcome all the defilements, including those of the destructive emotions within ourselves. So Master Nagarjuna says in the Madhyamaka Karika, the fundamental verses, wisdom verses of the middle way, says, why we are born in samsara, this unenlightened existence, is because of karma, and karmas arise because of our destructive emotions. And destructive emotions in turn arise in us because of this kind of an exaggerated outlook on things. So in the Lamrim teachings, these kind of detailed explanation of the destructive emotions based on this exaggerated outlook is not, we do not come across this much. So Master Nagarjuna says, elimination of karma and delusions, there is, by elimination of it, there is nirvana, liberation. Karma and delusions come from this conceptual thought, which is this destructive outlook, exaggerated outlook, and that in turn comes through a certain mental construct. So even some scientists, one of whom I know very well, and whom I met when he was in his 80s, and then later, 2 years ago, I deliberately went to see him. So he's not a religious person, but someone, a scientist who has actually dealt with and treated people with psychiatric problem for decades. From his decades of experience relating or dealing with these people, he actually came up with this conclusion that when we become angry at somebody, I mean, the person or the thing is seen absolutely negative, whereas 90% of that negativeness is our mental projection. So this is exactly what Master Nagarjuna is saying when he says negative emotions arise through this conceptual thought, which is this exaggerated way of looking at things and people. So when we see, because of this exaggerated outlook, when we see something beautiful, or we become totally obsessed with it out of attachment, and when we become something unattractive, we become absolutely averse to it. And so this exaggerated, improper mentation is based on or arises because of clinging to or fixation of our mind on some kind of independent, objective existence in things. Because we cling onto such existence, independent, objective existence, then we have that kind of exaggerated. Whereas if you are able to say that whatever appears, whether beautiful or unattractive, I mean, they do not have any objective independent existence, then there is no basis for this exaggerated outlook, exaggerated perception of things. It's very clear. So elimination of karma and delusions, there is liberation. Karma and delusions arise from exaggerated outlook, and this in turn is based on this mental construct, the fabrication. So Buddha's saying that suffering is because of our ignorance. It's very clear. Why do we suffer? Because we are ignorant. We think that if we are able to defeat our enemies, I mean, there will be victors. In the 400 verses or some other text, it's mentioned that there's nobody who dies having overcome all his or her enemies. Because once you have overcome some enemy, there will be others who will also rise against you. And so this is something logical. They are not using any scriptural authorities, scriptural citations, but using logic. So because we see things as if they have some independent own existence, the understanding of emptiness is able to confirm to us that there is no such existence in things. And therefore, there's no basis or ground for this improper mentation, inappropriate mentation. And therefore, it is possible for us to attain the ultimate state where we have abandoned all negativities, defilements from within our mind stream. And this is possible through the understanding of emptiness. So both the obscuration, which are the destructive emotions, and the obscuration to knowing everything. So in order to attain this knowledge of everything, overcoming the obscuration to knowledge, it must the understanding of emptiness must be combined with the bodhicitta. So Master Nagarjuna wrote the Mula Madhyamaka Karika, and then the first commentary to this is Buddha Palita, by Buddha Palita, and then later Bhaviveka wrote the So, according to his commentary, he seems to be in the lamp of wisdom by Master Bhaviveka. He seems to assert some objective existence in things. And then there's a common locus that can be agreed between the different traditions. And later, Bhaviveka also wrote these commentaries like the essence or heart of Madhyamaka and its commentary, Dargajwala, and later Chandrakirti came and he wrote the Madhyamaka Avatara and the commentary on Madhyamaka Karika, which is that of the Prasana Pada. So if we assert some objective existence in things, we will not be able to overcome the destructive emotions completely. And therefore, the improper mentation cannot be overcome because there's something to hold on to for them. Whereas if we are able to assert that things do not have any objective existence, whatever, that they are merely designated, then all objectification is destroyed. Therefore, those who study Madhyamaka texts must really give serious thought to these. So I had an assistant in debate from Mongolia, Senshep Nguduchonye, and he was especially interested in Madhyamaka philosophy. And so because of his influence, I began to take eager interest in Madhyamaka. I clearly remember this, that he told me, this verse from Tsongkhapas in praise of the Buddha for teaching dependent origination, with his hands and this gesture, he said this verse is very difficult for him to understand. So because of his influence, I began to take interest in Madhyamaka philosophy. So I do read, even today, I do read texts on Madhyamaka. So there is the commentary on the Madhyamaka Karika by Jerimbuche, which is called the Ocean of Wisdom, Reasoning. So which is a very marvelous text. So whether you are a follower of Tsongkhapa or not, if you could study these texts, the inside section of Lamrim Chemo and Lamrim, the smaller Lamrim, and also the text on the definitive and interpretive meanings of the sutras. And it's really important, would be helpful. So to study these is very important. So it would be good for you to study. So whether you are Kagyupa or Nyingma, followers of the Kagyu or Nyingma traditions, of course you have your own text from your own tradition, from your own scholars. But if you could also compare them or read these 5 texts by Tsongkhapa on Madhyamaka side by side, it would be really helpful. So if you understand if you understand what emptiness means, then you will be able to understand what is meant by Sang Gye. So these 2 words in Tibetan, Sang Gye and Chang Chup, meaning enlightenment or Buddhahood and enlightenment, can be achieved, and the meaning of these or what these refer to can be achieved by understanding emptiness, because when you are able to eliminate, I mean, you are able to overcome all the defilements, then there is this purification that you can achieve, and then you can, when you are fully enlightened, when you are aware of everything as it is, and you are somebody who has the total knowledge of everything. In one of the commentaries to Abhisamaya Alamkara, perhaps by Vimuktisena or somebody, it is mentioned that the bodhisattvas, with their wisdom, they focus, they direct their mind to the enlightenment, and with their compassion, they direct their mind to sentient beings. And so, by developing this great wish and aspiration to benefit all sentient beings across the expanse of space, when you have that kind of determination, what you need to do is, as the Buddha said, the sages do not wash away the sins of sentient beings. They do not remove the suffering of sentient beings with their hands, nor do they shift their own realization into others. But how do they help sentient beings? By showing, as the Buddha says, by showing in that verse, that very verse, by showing the reality as it is, they lead beings to liberation. So by showing or teaching the antidote to our fundamental ignorance, and the process they also teach the method part of the practice, such as compassion and so forth, and then also teach that of emptiness, the ultimate nature of how things are, which is opposite to how ignorance holds on to, which is to say that it holds on to some objective, independent existence in things. And so, when we talk about the interest of fulfilling the interest of others, what that interest is that of ultimately that of the liberation which the others would attain. And so, with the wish to help sentient beings, you direct your mind towards enlightenment. So the purpose is to help others, and for you to attain enlightenment, the purpose is to help others. So within compassion, there is this mere wish that others may not have suffering. And then there's a great, called a more advanced compassion, which is that determination to bring the others' suffering to end. So, for those bodhisattvas of the sharp faculty, in order to bring about that state for others, and others, then they first develop this understanding of emptiness. So Shandarakshita actually makes this distinction between the bodhisattvas of sharp faculty and dull faculty. The dull faculty, those with dull faculty first develop that of the bodhicitta and so forth, and then they go on to develop the understanding of emptiness. So those is trying to come up with, recall the lines from Shandarakshita's ornament of the middle way, Madhyamaka Alankara, which talks about these two types of bodhisattvas. So therefore, since there is no ground for being attached to some and hating others, I shall develop mind of equanimity towards all sentient beings. So when you want all sentient beings to be free from suffering and have all good qualities in them, I mean, if you are biased, you cannot, with that biased state of mind, you will not be able to think like that. So for your school children, if there is someone whom you like, you will share your gift. Whereas if you don't like somebody, you will not share your gifts with that person. So generally, when we call some people our friends, it's because they do some good to you. Whereas the others, so for some others, we call them as our enemies because they are the ones who do something bad to you. So to some we feel distant, and to others we feel close. So this is on the basis of their own behavior, attitude towards us. So your love towards some and hatred towards others is biased. So that love is actually tinged with attachment, whereas compassion does not consider whatever behavior or attitude others have towards you. You are actually looking at the person himself or herself, regardless of what they do to you, because they are same like you, wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. So we do not love ourselves because we are kind to ourselves as such, but because there is this innate wish to have happiness and not suffering. And therefore, we want to achieve that goal of happiness and avoid or overcome suffering. So not because we are kind to ourselves. So using the same, extending the same logic, we can understand that others also want happiness and not suffering. This is instinctively. And therefore, thinking along these lines of wanting happiness and not wanting suffering, we develop this sense of equanimity. Whether they are believers or non-believers, whether they have good behavior or the expression to you or bad, it doesn't really matter. The person is one, same like us, wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. And therefore, we develop equanimity. Our loved ones, near and dear ones, friends and so forth, whom we like, are same in wanting happiness and not wanting suffering, and our enemies also are same in that. Begin the meditation on equanimity by thinking of a neutral person, and then neutral, and consider people who are friends and foes. After the mind has developed equanimity towards all sentient beings, meditate on loving kindness. So we have discussed about whether the mind has a beginning or not. So if you posit the beginning of our mind, for example, if the first moment of mind has not come from a cause, then the next moments of mind also could come without cause. If there is a cause to the first moment of a mind, then is the cause a permanent one or an impermanent one? So if it's a permanent one, then it cannot have a moment. It cannot pass from one moment to the next. So because we see change in our mind, it shows that this mind comes from an impermanent cause. We can understand that, can't we? So because the mind has come from an impermanent cause, the cause also is twofold. A substantial cause, the basic primary cause, and then a cooperative condition. So why do we have these two causes? We can explain it as nature. So on the basis of the functionality of things and the dependent or relativity of things, we can talk about the evidence. So cause has these two, the primary and the secondary, which are the cooperative conditions. And then for something to arise as an effect of another thing, there must be homogeneity between the two. So the result must come from a homogeneous cause. So just as external phenomena like matter comes from matter, likewise, the consciousness can also only arise from a cause, which is a consciousness or a mind. So because the result must be similar, come from a similar cause. Therefore, the first moment of mind, if it had come from without any cause, it's a different case. And if it has come from some dissimilar cause, again, it's a different case. So if it has come from a similar cause, then we cannot posit any beginning of consciousness. If it has a substantial cause, it cannot have any beginning. So in Kalachakra, there is mention of a space particle from which arises other matters, whether it's called atom or it's a very, very subtle matter. So this is the basic unit, the basic fundamental cause of all matter. So even the atoms, the cells in our body have the beginning. I mean, is the result of that kind of space particle. So at that time also, when the space particle was there was this cause, the fundamental cause of the body that we have. And then as these particles came together, formed molecules and so forth, and then there came a time when the molecules could actually be a basis for consciousness. So we are talking about evolutionary theory from the Buddhist perspective. The evolutionary theory of Darwin is very similar. But I'm not sure about the long span of life of sentient beings that are mentioned in our scriptures, such as the first humans living immeasurable lifespan and so forth. We may face with faced with challenges. When I was once in Australia, one person came to me and asked if I believed in dinosaurs. I didn't know why he was asking. Of course, there are pictures of the skeletons of the dinosaurs, and when the scientists checked the age of these, it's like millions of years old. So when he asked this question whether I believed in dinosaurs or not, I wondered why he was asking. But later on, I learned that there are some very conservative Christians who believed in literally what is said in Bible. And so in Bible, according to Bible, this earth is only 5,000 years or so old. So therefore, for ourselves also, it is said that the first human beings lived immeasurable lifespan, and then when human beings lived 40,000 years and so forth, It is said that this Buddha Kashyapa or so forth appeared in the world and so forth. So these are very difficult to hold on to. And then in our scriptures also there is mention of human beings originating with some heavenly beings who came to the earth and who had light in their body, and later on, as they took some kind of nectar that were on the ground, and then they started having the genital organs and the lower openings and so forth. But whatever the case may be regarding these things, we can still find confidence in the teaching of the bodhicitta, this spirit of enlightenment. I mean, nobody will dislike this altruistic attitude, altruistic thought to benefit others, and also the understanding of emptiness. It's almost 12 o'clock. After the mind has developed equanimity towards all sentient beings, meditate on loving kindness, moisten the mental, continue with the water of loving kindness and prepare it as you would piece of fertile ground. When the seed of compassion is planted in such mind, germination will be swift, proper and complete. Once you have irrigated the mind stream with loving kindness, meditate on compassion. So here, loving kindness is this aspiration for others to have happiness and well-being, and compassion is this attitude or thought for others to be free from suffering. So again, in the Tibetan, there is a typo with this word ser here. It's not the word for gold, but the dampness in the soil. The moisture. The compassionate mind has the nature of wishing all suffering beings to be free from suffering. Meditate on compassion for all sentient beings, because the beings in the three realms of existence are intensely tortured by the three types of suffering in various forms. So from this sentence down, the identification of suffering, we come across the identification of suffering, which has three types, which are the suffering of suffering, changeable suffering, or suffering of change, and the conditioned existential suffering, which we'll go through tomorrow. Page 80, under the identifying the nature of suffering. Please give back the radios. Give me back the radios. Samet Dendre Dan Chosum Toji to Dan Denzig Top de Lume Dendu Tajaki Dembe Munlam Gang Man Yodo Shu.
Sure.
규정수마 창수 죽으러 봐. 탐지에 개발라 자자로 되게 다녀도 뭐야 이게?
This is the sutra recalling the three jewels. Sutra of recalling the three jewels. Homage to the omniscient one, purified and consummate, victorious, virtuous and transcendent, thus going for destroying. Entirely perfect Buddha, full of wisdom, the blissfully proceeding, the knower of the world, charioteer and subduer of beings, the unsurpassable, the teacher of gods and humans. Such is Buddha, victorious, virtuous and transcendent. He who is thus gone exemplifies the merit which is his cause. In him no root of virtue is ever worn away. Through his manifold patience, he is excellently beautiful. He is the treasure ground of merit, adorned with the tokens of enlightenment. He is the tokens of enlightenment. He is graced with the flowers of marks of the marks of Buddhahood. All he does is timely and opportune, and nothing harmonious mars the sight of him. True joy indeed he gives to those who open up their hearts to him in faith. Through the brilliance of his wisdom, he is the unconfounded, and against his power there is no victory. He is the teacher of all living beings, the father of Bodhisattvas, the king of all supreme ones. He is the guide of those who journey to the city beyond affliction. His wisdom is unbounded, his assurance is beyond imagining, his speech is altogether pure, well-tuned and sweet to hear. Gazing on him, one is never sated. His body is beyond compare by the rams of desire. He is unstained by the ram of form. He is wholly uncontaminated. He is not mingled with the formless. He is altogether free from misery, and from the aggregates he is utterly and altogether liberated. The elements have no hold on him. He has mastery of the sense powers. All bonds He has completely severed him from all pain. He is perfectly and totally released. No craving does he have. He has passed beyond the stream. Perfect is his wisdom. All the Mahayana teachings and skillfully set out the approach of vast conduct. Founder of the tradition of mind only, prophesied by the Buddha, noble master Sangha, to you I pray. You have held the tradition of the 7 treatises of the Abhidhamma in twofold and the non-dual non-duality, and clarify the philosophies of Vaibhashika, Sautrantika and Vijnanavada, most excellent of scholars, renowned as a second all-knowing Buddha, Acharya Vasubandhu, to you I pray. Master logician who granted the eyes of wisdom, you set a line lamp which illuminates the text of ornament for realization and the meaning of transcendent wisdom passed down by the Sangha and his brother in accordance with the Madhyamaka tradition beyond all extremes of existence and non-existence. Arya Vimukti Sena, at your feet I pray. As prophesied by the Buddha, you explained the Mother Panchaparamita and according to the instruction received from the protector Maitreya, clarified the 3 mothers, the supreme scriptures of transcendent wisdom. Acharya Haribhadra, to you I pray. You brilliantly summarize the meaning of the vast Vinaya collection according to the tradition of Sarvastivadins and explained the Moksha superbly and without mistake. Supremely disciplined and learned Gunaprabha, at your feet I pray. You gained the precious treasure-like qualities of threefold training and brilliantly explained the meaning of extensive scriptures in order to preserve the flawless teaching of monastic discipline. Supreme holder of Vinaya, Shaktaprabha, at your feet I pray. You imparted all the profound and vast teachings given by the Buddha by explaining the paths for beings of the 3 levels of spiritual capacity and caused the Buddha's teaching to flourish within the land of snows. Kind and precious Lord Atisha, to you I pray. Through these prayers of mine made with a mind of vivid and unshakable faith, to these most brilliant of scholars who, like ornaments, enhanced and beautified the world and were the supreme sources for many wondrous and excellent teachings, may my mind be blessed so that it is matured and brought to liberation. May I be blessed. So today we are going to have a Dharma discourse. So this, which means whether in Tibet or in the Himalayan regions, the practitioners, when they come across the teachings like this, they usually think about reciting mantras and doing some rituals. In Tibet, when extensive teachings were given for the Gyalwang, they usually have the teachings on the graduated path to enlightenment, and then other traditions relate what are known as the 4 ways of turning the mind away from attachment to samsara. And so, of course, these are very good, which has helped and benefited many hundreds of people. As for me, I'm an 82-year-old person who has seen many things around the world. And therefore, the tradition that we have been used to in Tibet seems to be according to the system called the specifically tailored teaching for individuals, but not the system of introducing the general structure of the teaching of the Buddha. So teaching the two truths, which relates to the how things are, and then leading on to the 4 noble truths and so forth, is not done so much. Of course, in the Lamrim by Tsongkhapas, there's the brief teaching on the Four Noble Truths, but mainly the teachers and masters have focused on giving some initiations of deities, tantric yoga, the deity yoga practices, and then the students also more or less focused on the deity yoga practice of tantra and reciting mantras. But today we are in the 21st century. In this world, which is lots of filled with hustle and puzzles, if we leave aside the general structure of the teaching of the Buddha and only focus on the specifically tailored teaching of Tantra, I think that this is not sufficient. Therefore, when I give teachings, first I give an introduction to the teaching of the Buddha, Buddhism, and then having done that, when you are able to actually relate to how to do the practices in one sitting, that would be more relevant. So in other words, what I'm saying is the introducing Buddhism on the basis of the like summarizing the content of the over 300 volumes of Buddhist literature. So although I'm not able to do much, but I do my best to give an introduction to Buddhism first, and then for, of course, some individuals, if we can lead them onto the path specifically tailored for individuals. And so if you look at the Ganjur and the Tengyur literature, most of them teach according to the structure, general structure of the teaching of the Buddha, the general approach to the teaching. Whereas in Tantra, then you find the Buddha appearing in the form of a deity, the principal deity of the mandala, and giving teachings, tantric initiations, tantric teachings to very specific disciples. So in the case of, for example, the Heart Sutra, at the end we find mentioned that in the assembly, in the audience of the teaching of this perfect wisdom, there were the humans, gods, humans, Asuras, Gandharvas, and so forth, which shows that there is a huge number of different types of beings listening to the teaching. So the first teaching of the Buddha, teaching on the Four Noble Truths, is something which is given publicly, in public, whereas the Paramita teachings were not given publicly like that. Although it mentions in the assembly of there were the Asuras, Gandharvas, and so forth, and therefore there was this argument that the Mahayana was not taught by the Buddha himself. Mahayana was not the words of the Buddha, because these teachings, like the Panchaparamita teachings, were not given in public, in big assemblies of disciples. And particularly there were people who said, even in the past, that Tantra also is not the teaching of the Buddha. It is actually taken from the Hindu tradition. But in Tibet, Tantra became very prevalent. In Tantra, of course, Vajramaster is very important, therefore Guru is said to be very important. So, but just following the tradition, without the teacher being able to give much introductory teaching of Buddhism, but following some rituals. Therefore, some Westerners who have visited Tibet in the past have termed Buddhism in Tibet as Lamaism. It's the teachings of the Lamas, as if So, of course, in the great monastic learning institutions, of all the different traditions of Buddhism in Tibet, being our noble Avalokiteshvara, those surrounding India entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, Asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised. That spoken by the Bhagavan. Holiness wants the chant master to come forward. So that there would be more space for people to move up.
Yes.
Let's recite the praise of the 17 Nalanda masters. The prayer to kindle the threefold faith, addressed to the 17 great Pandithas of glorious Nalanda institution by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, perfectly arisen through the compassionate wish to benefit beings, and more exalted even than gods, you have reached the supreme level of protection and abandonment and realization, and guide beings to liberation through teaching us on dependent origination. Mighty Shakyamuni, son among teachers in devotion, I pay homage to you. You brilliantly clarify the meaning of reality, except the ultimate intent of the Mother Panchaparamitas, with profound modes of logical reasoning based on dependent reasoning. Founder of the middle way tradition of the supreme vehicles, prophesied by the Buddha himself, noble master Nagarjuna, to you I pray. You were the foremost of his spiritual heirs, supremely learned and accomplished, a master of all the infinite schools of philosophy inside and outside of your own tradition, and the glorious crowning jewel of all who follow Nagarjuna's approach, Bodhisattva Arya Deva. To you I pray. You clarify the wisdom and intent of the Arya, the ultimate meaning of dependent origination, as well as the profound and crucial meaning concerning merely nominal and imputed existence, and reach the level of supreme accomplishment. Noble Buddha Palita, at your feet I pray. Great Pandita, who founded the comprehensive system in which the extremes, such as the arising of true entities, are refuted, and valid logic and commonly perceived outer objects are accepted. Acharya Bhav Viveka, to you I pray. You developed and elaborated upon the complete path of Sutra and Tantra, skillfully teaching the profound and vast, the middle way tradition of appearance and emptiness, in which the two extremes are dispelled through dependent origination and the mere fact of conditionality. Glorious Chandrakirti, to you I pray. You skillfully revealed to the assembly of fortunate disciples the most wondrous and amazing path of the great compassion in so many ways, and with reasoning both profound and vast. Bodhisattva Shantideva, to you I pray. Founder of the tradition which skillfully combines Madhyamaka and Brahman, teaching the middle way path of twofold. The non-dual emptiness according to the capacity of disciples, and introducing the Buddha's teaching to the land of snows. Great Abba Chandarakshita, to you I pray. You brilliantly set out the stages of meditation according to both Sutra and Tantra, combining the views of the middle way beyond extremes with the unity of Samatha and Vipassana, and clearly revealed the unmistaken teaching of the Buddha. In the land of snows, Kamalashila, to you I pray, guided and cared for by Maitreya, you worked brilliantly to further all and the wisdom of the Buddha, past, present, future. Buddha's past, present, and to come, he has made his dwelling in Nirvana, where all suffering is transcended. He does not abide his abode in the summit of perfection, whence he perceives all living beings, such is the sublime qualities which are the greatness of the Buddha, victorious, virtuous, and transcendent. Do you get me? 1, 2, 3, check, 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 check for English translation. Okay, thank you. Well spoken is the Dharma by the victorious, virtuous, and transcendent. It is perfect way. It is the perfect way of seeing and is devoid of flaws. It is perennial and leads us to onward. To see this Dharma is to fulfill one's purpose. It produces them in the wise, the wisdom of the all distinguishing. The Dharma spoken by the victorious, virtuous, transcendent is shown to be well tempered to the instruction and the need of all. It drives one from samsara and causes one to go to perfect Buddhahood. It is free from contradiction, and in it all is summarized. It is totally to be relied upon. It is cutting the root. The Sangha of the Mahayana comprises those who have well entered, wisely entered with the straightforwardness and aptitude. Right it is to join one's hands before them, the right to make prostrations. They are the glorious fields of merit. They are the perfect recipients of gifts. They are the object of offering everywhere and always there. They are the worthy objects of all offerings. Next is the Heart Sutra. Thus did I hear at one time that Bhagavan was dwelling a mass of Valchap mountain in Rajagriha together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the bodhisattva... No. Radio is there. Behind you. Also, this Mahasadvarya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, the great being, noble Avalokiteshvara, how should any son of the lineage who wishes to train in the practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom. He said that, and the Bodhisattva, great being, noble Avalokiteshvara, said this to the Venerable Sharadodiputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form, and form too is not other than emptiness. In this way, feelings, discrimination, composition factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unseized, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, and not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no eye element, and so on up to including no mind element and mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on up to, and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, that origination, cessation, true path, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, but the bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear, having completely gone past beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the 3 times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared that yatha gate para sangate bodhi swaha Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, the great being, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagwan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva, the great being, Nabalabalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoiced, the Bhagwan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvati Putra, the Bodhisattva, the great